His name is Glenn Anderson. He graduated from Chicago Players Workshop of Second City, where he learned the art of improvisation, and at the same time was working in the business world, working with IBM in a wide range of roles. Then he decided to put those two things together. Now he's a professional public speaker, combining his love for improv with everything he learned in the business world, and today he's busier than ever, helping companies energize their communication as well as entertain people in the thousands. The title of his talk, 7 Ways to Save Your Sanity and Stop Burning Your Toast. Please give a warm stretch welcome to Glenn Anderson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So, I have a confession to make. Yes, I do burn my toast. You see, several years ago, my wife and I downsized from a big Victorian house to a much smaller apartment. The big Victorian house had a very large kitchen. That kitchen would call out, "Fix a big meal for your family." The apartment has a much smaller kitchen. It calls out, "Go out to eat in a restaurant." And so, because of this much smaller kitchen, I also had to downsize how many appliances I could have sitting on the kitchen counter. So I had to get rid of my traditional toaster and replace that with just a toaster oven because it would do multiple things. My favorite breakfast is simply toast and coffee. So the alarm goes off in the morning, I jump up, I start the coffee maker, I take a couple slices of bread, I slide them into the toaster oven, I turn the timer knob, and then I run off to do a little multitasking. So I grab the newspaper out of the front door, I water the plant that always seems to need watering, I check my phone to see if any messages have come in, I log on to my business email account where I discover that next month's conference has moved up the handout deadline to tomorrow. Next week's conference has changed my 45-minute breakout to a 2-hour workshop, and the airline has canceled my flight and moved me to another flight, so I'm not going to get there in time to talk in the first place. And those are just the first 3 emails. My phone has started to ding with messages that are coming in, but I decide to check my personal email, where I discover that the concert I stood in line 3 hours for to get a ticket has been canceled. The restaurant where I made a special reservation for my wife's birthday dinner accidentally overbooked and I no longer have a table. And the garage where I parked my car is going through some renovation. I'm going to have to find another place to park my car for the next 2 months. And those are just the first 3 emails. I hear the coffee maker ding. I run back into the kitchen. I pour myself a cup of coffee. I glance over at the toaster oven, and then I remember that the timer knob still doesn't work right. And while the timer is pleasantly clicking away, the knob no longer moves. And so my toast, once again, looks like this. And my morning is really kind of starting to feel like this. Burnout is a bit like toast. How toasty are you these days? A little lightly toasted? Getting a little crispy, perhaps? Or maybe you're burned all the way through. Well, what I want to do here this afternoon for the next few minutes is share with you 7 ideas, 7 suggestions, 7 ways that you can save your sanity and stop burning your toast. So here we go. Number 1, discover the value of white space and the strategic pause. Do you all remember when you learned, when you were a youngster, to build a campfire? I remember this very well. I gathered all the combustibles. I had newspaper, I had some pine needles, I had some little sticks, I had some big logs. I jammed them all together, tried to light it. It just wouldn't keep burning. And finally, I learned the secret was that the fire needed air. You had to kind of separate those combustible pieces so that the oxygen could flow. And that, to me, is a great analogy of you on the job at your workplace. That is, you need to have some space where some air can flow. And that's what white space is. White space is time with no assignment. Time with no assignment. The name comes from these little spaces of white space that show up on your calendar. And the way that you make white space appear during your workday is by having a strategic pause. Now notice, this is not a nap. This is not meditation. This is not a lazy pause. This is not a procrastination pause. It's a strategic pause. Pauses are good for performance. Think of it as kind of like a glass of water that's sitting on your desk, and you can pick it up and take a little sip whenever you need. So what can you do with this strategic pause, with this white space? Well, for example, you can use it to recuperate. Maybe you just simply need to reboot your tired body, reboot your tired brain. Have you ever been on an airplane in the middle of the day and looked around and seen how many people are asleep at noon? I mean, people are tired. People never get enough rest. And so you can use this little strategic pause perhaps to recuperate. I would think this is what a lot of people would probably imagine a strategic pause would be about. But I would say it's a lot more than that. You could use it to reduce, meaning think for a moment about stuff in your workday that doesn't need to be there, that you can clear out of the way, unnecessary stuff. You can use it this time to reflect. Maybe this would be your opportunity to make a decision, an important decision, and not have all the distractions around. Or maybe you can use it to construct. This is where you could be solving a problem or spending a few minutes thinking about that next new feature that you want to add into your software. Recuperate, reduce, reflect, construct. This is strategic pause that gives you that air that's going to flow into your workday called white space. Ask yourself, when is the last time I guiltlessly allowed myself some time with no assignment? That's number one, white space and the strategic pause. Number two, identify the thieves of time. You know, one of the biggest contributors to burnout on the job is guilt. People just feel guilty. If I'd only listened to the right podcast, I'd know what I was doing. If I'd only picked the right software, we wouldn't be having this problem. Let me tell you, folks, it is not your fault. Your business, your team, your company, and you are being propelled by these drivers that are driving those things: drive, excellence, information, and activity. Now, these are really good things, and they can be really helpful to you and your team and your company until they become thieves of your time, until they become corrupted. I'm reminded of a vine that we planted in front of our porch on our house. We call it morning glory, and it's really beautiful until it's not, until it becomes annoying. And what happens is morning glory starts growing, and it just never stops. And it covers the entire front of the porch, and then it goes over the railing of the porch and starts to wrap itself around your furniture. And then in my case, it literally went under the fence next to the house and was choking the rose bushes of my neighbor next door. I mean, this was a lot of trouble. This was something that started out really nice and beautiful and turned into something really annoying and troublesome. And the same thing is true about drive, excellence, information, and activity. These are good for you and your team until they're not, until they become corrupted, when they become thieves of time. For example, when drive becomes overdrive. This is where, for example, you accept every meeting invitation that comes your way because you just can't imagine that you shouldn't be in every meeting that's being held. Or this is when excellence becomes perfectionism, when you're tweaking that presentation and retweaking and retweaking and retweaking. Again, losing time along the way. This is when information becomes overload, when you've just can't imagine that you don't have enough data. You have to have a little more data, have to have a little more data. And this is when activity turns into frenzy. When you, for example, refuse to take that strategic pause, you just keep having to reach out and take the next thing off your to-do list and the next thing off of your to-do list, and activity has turned into frenzy. Now, this chart is called the thieves of time, but as I think about this, I think it could also be called the thieves of energy. Because I think for many of you, what could be causing burnout on the job would be more energy that you're losing than time. I don't know, maybe you run out of energy before you run out of time. And so you need to think about these thieves here in terms of how much energy they're sucking out of your day. And so you need to really think for a minute and identify what are things in my workday that really are sucking the energy out of me in a thievery kind of way. Maybe meetings that just suck the energy out of you, certain tasks, certain people that maybe suck the energy right out of you. So we could be talking about thieves of time, or maybe in some combination, thieves of energy. Both of those can really be contributing to burnout on the job. Let me tell you a quick story about information overload. There was a fellow named Steve. He was a data scientist at Microsoft. And one day he got a request to produce 22 items of collateral for the sales team. And he looked at this request and he just knew this was way more information than anybody on the sales team was ever going to pay any attention to. But he went ahead and he produced the 22 pieces of collateral. But what he did was, right in the middle of each piece of collateral, right where you couldn't miss it if you were actually reading the collateral, he stuck this message. If you are actually reading this, email me and I send you an Amazon gift card for $50. He didn't have to give out any Amazon gift cards. And the next year, when the sales team came back and asked for 22 pieces of collateral, he told them this story, and they were flabbergasted. That's information overload. Folks, ask yourself, how are these thieves of time, drive, excellence, information, activity, how are these thieves of time getting in my way? Thieves of time, or also perhaps thieves of energy. Number 3, utilize the simplification questions. I'm going to give you 4 simplification questions here. You know, when you pause for a moment and start asking questions, you can really slow yourself down and kind of stop and see what's going on. When I think about these questions, I think about they're kind of like a speed bump. You know, the speed bumps, you encounter them on the road and they cause you to slow down. Now, I live in Chicago and we have a lot of speed bumps in our neighborhoods, and I thought I understood speed bumps. But then one year I went on vacation to Mexico, to the Yucatan, and let me tell you, these people know speed bumps. I mean, you can be going down a highway, a major highway going up and down the Yucatan Peninsula, and you keep seeing these signs, tope, bumpers. I mean, they're everywhere. And let me tell you, these are some serious speed bumps. If you hit this thing going very fast at all, you are busting up the suspension on your car. So the speed bumps are working. They're really slowing people down. And I think the same way about these 4 simplification questions. They can slow you down. And each one of these questions helps you deal with one of the thieves of time. So each one matches up with one of the thieves. So example, the first one, is there anything I can let go of? You pause, you slow down, you ask yourself that question, and that's really helping with drive and overdrive. Where is good enough good enough? And again, this is helping you when excellence is turning into perfectionism and becoming a thief of time. Does everything have to be perfect? I think often an example that's given is internal presentations. Do I really have to tweak and retweak and retweak and retweak an internal presentation that's just going to a bunch of my colleagues? I mean, that would be an example where you might ask this question: is good enough good enough? What do I truly need to know? And if you can answer that question, that can help you with information turning into overload. And what deserves my attention? And again, this is where activity is turning into frenzy. Again, don't lose sight of what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about how to avoid burnout on the job. And so when these thieves of time here are stealing your time and stealing your energy, this is what is creating burnout among workers on the job. And slowing down and asking these 4 questions can help you deal with those thieves of time. Ask yourself, what meaningful work am I really not making time for because of the thieves of time? And ask yourself those simplification questions. Number 4, refute the expectations of hallucinated urgency. I love that term, hallucinated urgency. You know what this looks like? This is when you keep interrupting your colleagues all the time. This is where you never have time to even think of an answer before you have to give a response. This is that hallucination of urgency inside your business. And this, I think, can create burnout more than anything else. So what you want to do to handle that, to refute those expectations, is first of all, understand those 4 thieves and whether they are generating some of this urgency by asking yourself the simplification questions. And then here's a new idea that we're going to add to this. Utilize what we call the white space wedge. The white space wedge is a little portion of white space like we talked about before, but we're going to insert it between a couple activities. Again, just to give us a little gap to slow down the hallucinated urgency. So let me tell you, folks, when the buzz of the day is frying your circuitry, what I want you to do is break the glass. This is an emergency, all right? So you break the glass and you reach out and you grab one of these little white space wedges. Let me show you some examples. Maybe it's between meetings. How many of you are in the kind of work environment where one meeting just backs up to the next one, backs up to the next one, whether they're virtual meetings online or whether they're face-to-face meetings, and you don't even have time to think as you're moving from one meeting to the next? Stick a little white space wedge in there. Maybe that means you leave the first meeting 5 minutes early. Maybe that means you arrive at the next meeting 5 minutes late. But at least you've had a chance to kind of regroup and think about what's happening and dial down the stress level a little. Maybe you use a white space wedge between an impulse that you have to do something and actually taking the action. Again, just to slow yourself down a little. Maybe it's between an incident that occurred and your response to that incident. Again, sticking that little wedge of white space in there to slow yourself down, give you time to think about it. Maybe it's between work and home. I met a lady at a conference recently, and she uses the white space wedge to separate work and home. And here's how she does it. When she leaves her office and she gets in her car and she's driving home, she calls her husband on the phone, and he's already at home. And so she calls her husband, and for the entire drive home, she vents about her day. and how bad everything was and what's going wrong and what the hard things were and on and on and on. And then when she pulls up in front of her home and she gets out of the car, she ends the phone call and she is done. And she walks into the house and then she has a nice evening with her family. She's using that time in the car talking to her husband on the phone as a white space wedge to separate work and home. Now, I know this can be particularly tough if you work at home, as I do. You know, you're working, finally the workday ends, and what do? You open the door, and now you're in your home with your family, and all that stuff comes in front of you. So if that's you, I would think about what could be a little white space wedge that I could stick there. Maybe I'd log off and shut down everything, and then I just sit there in my home office and change my thoughts, think about something else for a few moments before I open the door and step into the rest of the family. But use a white space wedge to make that break. Maybe you use it between an idea that you have and the plan that you're going to use to execute that. So, take a pause, look for one of the thieves of time that's creating the urgency, ask one of the simplification questions, and then verify that the urgency is really urgent. For example, you might have a request that is truly not time sensitive. That means it could be done anytime, it has no direct bearing on the business today, if you identify that. Maybe the request is actually tactically time sensitive. That is, a fast response to this request is actually going to influence the business. So then you need to understand that. I think most often, hallucinated urgency is caused by requests that are emotionally time sensitive. That means they're being driven, the urgency is being driven by emotion, or by curiosity, or by stress. And it really doesn't have to be answered immediately to affect the business. So I would challenge you, again, as you're trying to dial down the stress of hallucinated urgency and deal with that expectation, to verify the urgency level, along with the pause and the thief and the simplification questions. Ask yourself, where could I lower the urgency in all of my areas of work? That will go a long way towards helping you with burnout on the job. As was mentioned in my bio, I've spent most of my adult life studying and performing improvisational comedy. You probably know how this works. If you've ever seen improv comedy before, the actors come on stage, they ask for suggestions from the audience, and then they improvise on the fly based on those suggestions, with no script, no rehearsal, no pre-planning. And I have to tell you, I learned a lot about teamwork, collaboration, listening, paying attention, communication by performing improv in front of a live audience. And so the improv wisdom that I have here in number 5 is, don't prepare, just show up. Improv actors show up, and then when they step on the stage, that's when the magic happens. And so what you want to do if you're thinking like an improv actor, for example, avoid what's called stockpiling. Stockpiling is when, in advance of something you're going to do, you are filling your head with all the stuff that you think you might want to need to know or use prior to the actual event. And this is bad news for an improv actor. I kind of learned this the hard way. When I was new performing improv, and I knew we had a show to do that night, the improv troupe I was part of, I would go through the day and think, oh, that's pretty funny, I should use that tonight. Oh, that's kind of clever, I should use that tonight. Oh, that's an interesting news story, I should use that tonight. And so I jammed my head full of all of these ideas. I was stockpiling all these ideas. And so when the show actually came and I stepped on stage, I wasn't paying attention to what other people were doing or what they were building with the suggestion. I was trying to think about, how can I use all this stuff I stuck into my head? And that was not good as an improv actor. That was stockpiling. And I would say you, on the job, you can eliminate a lot of stress that leads to this burnout by avoiding doing too much stockpiling. Let's say you have a meeting, you're about to go into a meeting. And so you're sitting there at the desk in the time before the meeting, and you're filling your head with all the stuff. What could they ask me? What do I need to know? What do I have to make sure I know? So no matter what comes up in the meeting, I've got the right answer. And so you're stockpiling like that. And then when you get into the meeting, you don't even have the energy to pay attention because you're managing all this stuff that you pre-stored into your head on the chance that something might be asked. Substitute attention for preparation. Folks, you are smart people, you are skilled and experienced people, you know what you're doing. Discover the freedom that can come from trusting that you have what you need. You're going to step into that meeting, you have what you need, you're smart and sharp and you've been doing the job every day. Don't stress out by stockpiling, by filling your head like I was doing as an improv actor, because then you can't even pay attention. You're sitting in the meeting, you're not even listening to what's going on in the meeting because you're just worried about all this stuff that you've stockpiled into your head. Substitute attention for preparation. You know, often people watch clever improv actors on stage and they go, how are they so clever? How are they so funny? And I'll tell you, listening is like the improv actor's superpower. They are paying close attention to what is going on stage. They're watching everybody else and then they can relate to that, and that's what makes them look so smart and clever. They are using attention. Change your vantage point. Refresh your mind. How many of you have been coming into this room pretty much all day today and you've been sitting in kind of the same place all day? Anybody been doing that? You know, the work is the same thing is true. Get up away from your desk, walk around, take a walk outside. You know, change your vantage point, clear your mind. Now, I get a lot of pushback on this one. You know, don't prepare, just show up. And people are like, wait a minute, I'm getting ready to give a big presentation for my customers. You're telling me I should not prepare? No. I mean, obviously there's times where preparation is important and necessary. But I think too often we overstress and we're preparing way more than we need to. Again, discover the freedom that comes by trusting that you have what you need. So don't prepare, just show up. And here's some more improv wisdom. Be average and make mistakes. You know, improv actors get on stage and they know they're going to make mistakes. I mean, it's an improv. There's no script, there was no rehearsal, no pre-planning, so some things are going to go wrong. Let me give you an example. If we're doing an entire improv show, so I'm up here with my troupe and we're doing a whole show, and from scene to scene, we will take on different names to try to help the audience know that I'm a different character. So you don't want, Glenn is a taxi driver, Glenn is a doctor, Glenn is a chef, that gets kind of confusing. So every scene, we just kind of take on a different name. So one night we were doing a show, and in a particular scene, my name for that scene was James. But the guy that I was doing the scene with got confused, and he was still thinking about the last scene, and so he called me Charles by mistake. Now, I knew he'd made a mistake, and the audience knew he'd made a mistake, but he didn't realize he'd made this mistake. And so when he called me the wrong name, I looked at him with this shocked expression, and I said, "Who told you about my secret identity?" And that just started a whole new track for the scene. See, we made a mistake, I made the mistake, work for me in the scene. Think inside the box. What is the expression? The expression is always think outside the box. And that's what we talk about when we talk about creativity. I think sometimes we're trying too hard. I think sometimes what we need might be right in front of us, inside the box. And so if you're taking this challenge all the time to think outside the box, you're probably stressing yourself when you don't really need to. The answer can be right there in front of you. People just try too hard. Again, doing improv, and we ask the audience for suggestions, often the audience would try too hard. We ask for a suggestion, and the audience yells out, "Deep fried mermaid." Ha ha ha. A whole audience laughs. Very funny suggestion. The trouble is, now what am I going to do with that as an improv actor? The joke was the suggestion. The audience was trying way too hard to be clever, to kind of out-clever the actors. I would have been much happier with an office with a typewriter, under the Eiffel Tower. I mean, those are interesting suggestions. And so don't overwork it. Think inside the box. The answer's right there in front of you. Don't try so hard. And be willing, to be average. You don't always have to think way outside the box. Take a circus bow. A circus bow is what happens when a clown in a circus makes a mistake. So they're out in front of the audience, and maybe they're juggling and they drop one of the juggling balls. Or maybe they tumble and the tumble doesn't go quite right, or the magic trick doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. What the clown does is, instead of kind of slinking away or trying to hide from the audience or act like nothing happened, after they've made that big mistake in front of everybody, the clown steps up in front of the audience and takes the biggest bow possible. Ta-da! And then they turn around to the people on the other side of the ring, of the three-ring circus. Ta-da! And that's a circus bow. They screwed up. They know it. They take a bow. So I would challenge you, when something goes wrong, when you're really trying hard to do something creative and new, and it doesn't go quite right, or there's a failure in your project, take a circus bow. That'll clear out the burnout right there. Okay, because you eliminate some of that stress. Lighten up a little bit. The key, folks, is having a flexible mind. You don't want to be the person that is a fixed mindset person. A fixed mindset person is someone who is afraid of change, does not want to take on the challenges of change. They think anybody who fails is a loser. The opposite of that is to have a growth mindset. A growth mindset says, I know I'm going to fail. I want to take on the challenges. I'm looking for change. I'm looking for something new. And when we fail, we'll figure it out and we'll move on. That's thinking like an improv actor with a growth mindset that's keeping a flexible mind. So number 6, be average. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Lighten up. And number 7, enjoy the ride. Embrace this Italian expression, this beautiful Italian expression, il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. Again, lighten up and just enjoy the ride. Take a strategic pause, stick a little white space into your life, and embrace the sweetness of doing nothing. If you'd like to read a little more, think a little more about some of the things I've shared with you this afternoon, 30 minutes is a really short amount of time. So this is a great book, A Minute to Think, by a very smart, clever lady, Juliet Funt. If you want to explore a little more, white space, strategic pauses, the simplification questions, you can read more about those in A Minute to Think. And if you'd like to discover a little more about what it means to think like an improv actor, this is a wonderful short little book here, Improv Wisdom. Don't prepare, just show up and kind of learn to think like an improv actor. Okay, let's summarize. I've given you 7 steps, so let's review them here one more time. First of all, discover white space and the strategic pause. Explore and identify the thieves of time, or possibly thieves of energy in your life. Drive and excellence and information and activity. Don't let those become thieves of time. And manage them with the 4 simplification questions that I gave you. In case of emergency, hallucinated urgency, break that glass and pull out a white space wedge and stick that white space wedge in there in between those activities. Think like an improv actor. Don't prepare, just show up and be willing to be average and make mistakes. And then finally, embrace this lovely Italian expression, il dolce far niente, the sweetness of doing nothing. And ladies and gentlemen, I promise you, if you embrace these 7 ideas that I've given you this afternoon, you will save your sanity and you will stop burning your toast. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I feel that that's good advice for life, not
Yes,
just for work.
absolutely.
Yes, wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, add your questions to Slido that you might have for Glenn. And while you're doing that, I'm going to present you with your gifts. Okay, we have some a nice tea for you.
Okay.
And we also have a beautiful portrait of Glenn for your.
Look at that smile, man. I'm a happy guy. Wow. As you're thinking about asking questions, remember this is the last thing before free drinks. But if you have a question, I'd be happy to address it. This was not complicated. Take it away.
Can they ask questions unrelated to what you said here on stage? Could they ask you anything? Or does it need to be related to your talk today?
Fire away.
Can you tell us about Chicago, Second City?
Sure. Improv comedy got its start in Chicago. In the late 1950s, there was a group of graduate students at the University of Chicago, and they were studying with an acting coach that was using improv games to try to help them be better actors. And they realized that those games could be fun in front of a live audience. And that was the start of the Second City Improv Comedy Club in Chicago. And that was back in the 1950s. Today it's still going strong, more popular than ever. There's a couple others outside of Chicago. I think there's one in Toronto and New York and Los Angeles. A lot of famous American comic actors get their start at Second City. Bill Murray, Tina Fey. Did you guys ever see the movie The Blues Brothers? Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, these kind of people all started at Second City.
That's right, yeah. We have a couple questions coming in.
Okay.
What's your favorite drink?
I love wine. And so I would say a good bottle of dry Sauvignon Blanc. And if I had to take one to take to a deserted island, it would be from New Zealand. So New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
If you like wine, you came to the right country, because we certainly have a lot of it here.
I will say I've had a chance to taste your Hungarian wine, and it is also top-notch.
They say we don't export much because we drink it all here. It's so
okay.
good. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you see it too much in the U.S.,
No.
but I'm happy to come here and drink your wine. Absolutely.
Okay. Joko says, your recommendations are primarily for individual level. How are they applicable to a team or an organization?
Yeah, I would say, for example, the thieves of time and the simplification questions, I talked about it as the question suggests at an individual level, but those questions and that kind of thinking can absolutely be applied to an entire team. I mean, is your team being sucked down by overdrive and perfectionism and frenzy? And so you can absolutely apply almost everything I talked about here today to a team level for sure.
Mm-hmm. Great question here by Anonymous. What if your toast is already burnt? How would you start applying the 7 tips?
Well, I'm kind of assuming when I do this talk that many of you already have burnt toast. So I feel like hopefully the suggestions I've given you today can start to clear away that burnness and start to open you up a little bit so that the next time you make toast, it's not so burned. But I really feel like almost everything I said today was thinking that many of you already have burned toast like the picture showed. So I think you just start with the things I've suggested.
Okay. We know we've given you no time to stockpile, I don't think. What does one do with the fried mermaid?
If that was a suggestion I got as an improv actor, I would probably do a scene in a restaurant, and that was on the menu, and my partner would be a customer, and I'd be trying to tell them why they'd love my chef's fried mermaid. I'd probably do something like that.
I like this question from Nino. He says, how would you nudge or stimulate a partner to follow these recommendations for avoiding burnout?
How would you nudge or stimulate a partner? Yeah, I often think that you as an example to others. I mean, another question, a similar question that I get a lot is, what if my manager's an ass? How can I do these things? And I always say that you demonstrating these things and demonstrating them to your partner, to your management or whatever, just shows, you're trying to teach people by doing it the way that you want to do it. So that's where I would start, or something like that.
By example.
Yeah,
Right.
by example, yeah.
When, how, why did you decide to create this talk?
I'm a professional speaker. This is what I do. I'm always looking for interesting new topics to get a room full of people to show up for. And I just feel like I've met a lot of people, and I meet people at events. And thinking back to my days at IBM, I worked for many years at IBM, and we were in a very stressful situation, like most of you were probably in. And so it just came to me one day. And actually, I read the book, A Minute to Think. I started with the Improv Wisdom book, because I'm always looking for new ideas for improv to turn into talks. And when I read that book, I thought, this could be the basis of a talk on burnout. And so it started there, and then I read The Minute to Think and pulled some of these other ideas together. But it really started with the Improv Wisdom book and just thinking about my life at IBM.
It is a hot topic these days.
Yes.
Not just before COVID, during and after.
Absolutely.
It's
COVID
evergreen.
only made all this worse.
It's an evergreen topic for sure.
Yep.
How to identify real emergencies fast enough? Real emergencies.
Yeah, I mean, you might not be in a position to personally, remember I talked about is it tactically urgent or emotionally urgent or really not urgent at all? And I guess you need to dig under that. So maybe if you're not in a position that you know the answer to that, you need to work through the team or through the management or the rest of your organization and discover what is the answer to that. And I think where it's difficult is when someone really believes that the urgent task they're bringing forward is tactically urgent, but if you dig under it a little, you discover it's really emotionally urgent. Then you have to be able to call people out on that, and that's not always easy.
Quick one here. Are you still doing improv?
A little bit. You might find this interesting, but the church that I attend back in Chicago, from time to time, they need some improv scene kind of stuff for something they're doing at the church. So I have a group of people at the church I go to that we do improv occasionally. But my days of doing it every weekend in a storefront in Chicago, which is what I did for many years, I kind of moved beyond that.
Okay. One more serious one and then a fun one.
Okay.
So how do you sell pauses to your line manager?
Yeah. Again, I think doing it by example, maybe if enough times you take that pause and then something good comes out of it, then they're going to see that there's value in that pause. But you need to remember, I joked a little, it's not taking a nap, it's not a lazy pause. I mean, you're taking a strategic pause because you want to do some of that stuff that we talked about to make something good happen. So if your manager sees you taking that pause, kind of closing the laptop or setting your pencil down or whatever, and just kind of sitting there for a few minutes and thinking, and something good comes out of that, and next week when you do it again, something good comes out of that, I think that's how you convince management of the value.
Okay. What would you say are the worthy thieves of time and energy? What are the most important things in life?
Oh my. It all started in the Garden of Eden. I like that list because I think if I had to pick, remember there was drive and excellence and information and activity. And there's been other talks here today about productivity, and I'm sure you all understand that activity, does not always equal productivity. And so I think if I had to pick one out of that list that was the most important, it would be to make sure that useless, wasteful activity turning into frenzy as it becomes corrupted. I mean, if I was going to attack one of those because I thought it was maybe a little more bad than the rest of them, I think that's the one I would start with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There was one question that we went through. I wonder if we can go back. It's about the crazy character. What was the craziest character you ever encountered? I think that was the question.
You mean in improv? Is that what they mean?
Yeah, I think so.
Like the craziest character I ever played?
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember. I mean, they're all crazy. I mean, sometimes they're very basic people. Like if I did that fried mermaid thing, it would be, you know, I'd be like a restaurant chef or a customer, and that would be pretty ordinary. But sometimes you get a request where suddenly you end up being a fish underwater or a bird up in a tree or something like that to make the scene happen. And those are really kind of using your creativity to figure out how to do that. You know, the other thing about improv, if you've ever seen it before, is there's no props. You know, you're just on an empty stage, so you have to make up everything. And so when there's a really hard suggestion like that and you're trying to be underwater or up in the sky or, you know, doing something crazy like that, to do it on stage without any props sometimes is a little tough.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Let's give a big hand to Glenn Anderson, everybody.
Let's go drinking!